Today we have Dr. Jatin Shah, who will be presenting on optimizing ovarian stimulation, and Dr. Jaideep will be talking about crosstalk between endometrium and the embryo. And of course, we have none other than Rupen you through the tests for andrology, male infertility, and what should be done and what should not be done, what the evidence says and what the clinician says. So can we have Dr. Jatin Shah's CV on the slide? Dr. Jatin Shah, you all know, has been the pioneer in IVF. He was a part of the team of the first documented Indian baby with Dr. Indra Hinduja. I told you all about this yesterday, and he's seen it all. And he's built up so many centers all over India, and now he is practicing in Bombay and doing great work, and a lot of the celebrity babies which have been born with Jatin. So over to you, Dr. Jatin Shah, for ovarian stimulation.
Thank you, dearest Naren, Jaideep. Thank you so much for all the lovely words you said yesterday, and thank you, Jaideep, for the certificate that you've given me. I really appreciate it. And ladies and gentlemen, and of course, Eris Life Sciences for giving us this wonderful platform. I've been given about 6 papers which were presented at ASHRAE, and which I have to explain to you and put in a few of my own inputs as to what exactly I feel about these papers. And I'll just share my screen. So is it okay? Everything? Is this fine?
Yeah, I think your voice is coming all right. The slide has not yet come, but I think they're on the way.
Is it seen now?
Absolutely.
Yes, it is seen, sir.
It's there? I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sir.
There, sir. I can see your first slide.
Yeah. So, friends, today we have to talk about various strategies to improve outcomes of ovarian stimulation. We have been using for the past 3 decades gonadotropins, agonists. New and interesting stuff was presented at the ASHRAE this year. And just to give you a little bit of background, till now, the main aim of our stimulation in IVF was, I always used to stress that you need a uniform cohort of follicles. It's very important that all your follicles grow at the same pace so that you get a uniform and a good batch of mature metaphase 2 eggs. I also used to stress that you need 5 to 15 good quality oocytes. But now all those are things of the past. Everybody is well versed that yes, these are in fact important things. What we didn't pay attention to was that we need to minimize injections, and we've all been waiting for some orally administered options to the agonist and the antagonist so that you can cut down, say for example, in the antagonist about 7 injections and in the agonist almost 25 to 30 daily subcutaneous injections. And also, of course, at the same time, we don't want to compromise the fact that we have to prevent a premature LH surge, and that is especially more important in centers who are doing batch IVF and they cannot afford to have some patients rupturing before time or whatever before the team arrives. It's also a very well-known fact that whatever you do when you use gonadotropins, 1 in 4 patients, 24%, will be prone to the premature LH surge. So initially we had the gold standard, the downregulation protocol, where we gave the agonist from day 21, mid-luteal phase, continued it until the day of HCG. All of you are well versed with the standard long protocol. But it had some drawbacks, not only that you cannot give the agonist trigger, so you had to use HCG. So in potential high responders, you often ended up with the dreaded hyperstimulation. This also, because you have suppressed the axis too much, you had to pump in a lot of exogenous gonadotropins, so it resulted in increased cost of therapy. And the worst problem was, which is why the Europe and the West switched to the antagonist, was that there were too many injections and it was a very patient-unfriendly protocol. So then came the antagonist protocol, where we started gonadotropins from day 2, then added the antagonist when the follicle became 14 millimeters in mean, and continued both until it's. Personally, I still haven't given up the agonist, and I feel that before I move on to the ASHRAE papers, a little bit on what I feel very strongly about, and that it's not the end of the road for the agonist. You can see this paper here comparing almost 600 patients in both the arms. for fresh IVF transfers, and you can see mean number of oocytes, mean number of embryos available, clinical pregnancy rates, live birth rates, all are significantly higher with the agonist as compared to the antagonist. So although we have a more patient-friendly protocol, fewer injections, yet pregnancy rates are often better with the agonist protocol. Even poor responders, we thought, the agonist cannot be given because it will over suppress an already suppressed patient. In fact, quite to the contrary, you can see again in Poseidon group 3, this study showed that is young patients with a low AMH or a low AFC, and you can see again the agonist did much better in terms of live birth rate as compared to the antagonist. And the biggest benefit here is you get a very uniform cohort when you use an agonist protocol. The biggest drawback of the antagonist cycle is if you have not done pre-treatment with either an estradiol or a progesterone or antagonist on day 2, 3, 4, very often you will, I'm sure you all agree that one follicle races ahead, becomes dominant. You thought you started on day 2 or day 3, but maybe the follicle was already recruited in the late luteal phase of the previous cycle, and that follicle becomes dominant, gives you a asynchronous cohort, and which is why the live birth rates tend to be lower in some of these patients. Now you would say, so what if one races ahead? But in a poor responder, you're talking of only 3 or 4 follicles. So if one goes ahead, you are not left with a good crop of eggs to play around with. This was our own study where we did not have 600 different patients in the same patient. These are all mostly poor responders, all with AMH levels of less than 2, where we normally practice what is called embryo pooling or embryo accumulation. So we did the first cycle for all of them with the antagonist, and second cycle we did with the conventional agonist using HPHMG 300. Here we used a combination of REC FSH and HPHMG. And really surprisingly, you can see the mean number of oocytes significantly higher, but more than just getting more eggs, which is obviously quite expected with an agonist protocol, which is why it often causes more hyperstimulation in normal and high responders. The main point was that the grade 1 embryos, top quality embryos, was way higher at 30% with the agonist as compared to just 17.5% with the antagonist. So although I'm going to show you a paper now where both of these are going to be discontinued and they are going to use just a progestin or a medroxyprogesterone acetate, which is equally effective for preventing a premature LH surge. But I am genuinely worried as to what will happen on getting a uniform cohort of follicles. So we know that with progestins, we finally eliminate injection menace once and for all. You just have to give daily 10 milligrams of medroxyprogesterone acetate from day 2 when you begin HMG. It fantastically and effectively blocks the LH surge completely. But obviously, because it's progesterone in the follicular phase, it is going to affect endometrial receptivity adversely and cause a lot of, we don't know what kind of histological changes. So you can't do a, please take home the message very clearly that you can use MPA to prevent a surge, but you cannot do a fresh transfer in that cycle because the endometrial receptivity will be altered. So only if you have a good backup program can you do a freeze-all and can you use MPA for this. Before I move on to the actual paper, something else which is really interesting, and because this paper also is about dual stimulation, you need to have a little background is. So until now we thought that follicular wave recruitment occurs only in the first half of the menstrual cycle, that's in the follicular phase. But we now know that almost 68 to 70% of women have 2 waves of follicular recruitment, one in luteal phase and one in 3 the recruitment. So dual stimulation takes advantage of this fact, and you can classic paper from Ubaldi which came in on 51 patients with a poor ovarian reserve. Easy to do. All you have to do is begin REC FSH and REC LH as this paper did from day 2 of menstruation. They then added the antagonist when the lead follicle was 14 millimeters, as is the usual practice. You cannot give an HCG trigger because you don't want too many corpora lutea interfering with your luteal phase. You have to use the agonist trigger. You then the usual 36 hours, wait for 3 or 4 days and restart REC FSH, REC LH. Again antagonist when you see a 14 mm follicle, again an agonist trigger and again a pickup. Now many of you would argue that what is the need to do this? And the reason for this is that the luteal phase stimulation somehow gives better quality embryos and a higher proportion of blastocysts as compared to the follicular phase stimulation. So you can see the rate of patients obtaining at least one euploid blastocyst increased from 42% to 65% when you add luteal phase stimulation to follicular phase stimulation. So that's the logic of doing this in poor responders. Not that you are in a tremendous hurry, except maybe cancer patients who have to go for chemotherapy and need to freeze eggs urgently. But even in poor responders, you would advise this. And we have been doing a lot of patients. We've done about 30 or 40 odd cases till now. And almost in 90%, we have noticed that the second half gives a dramatically better response, more eggs and better quality embryos too. Of course, we don't know pregnancy rate wise because the lockdown happened and we haven't been able to transfer those embryos, but we feel that definitely will be higher because the embryo quality is so much better. Now that you have this background, let's move on to that first study which I want to share with you, and that was whether MPA can be used to replace agonists and antagonists, and what can you use it during dual stimulation for follicular and luteal phase stimulation. Because the problem with dual stimulation, I showed you there are too many injections. You're starting from day 2 and going to day 26, and you are almost every day giving 1, 2, sometimes 3 injections a day. So if you could use MPA instead of the antagonist, that would be a significant benefit for the patient. So we know what is already known, that progestin will prevent the LH surge. And of course, we know that progesterone will have detrimental effects on endometrial receptivity, but maybe not on embryo quality. And of course, it does not influence the number or the quality of the eggs that you will get. So that is a fact already. What this paper proposed to see is what is the effect and how effective is progesterone in when you use it instead of the agonist or the antagonist in an IVF cycle. So there are 3 types of patients: one with the conventional antagonist in the follicular phase, the second who took progestin in the follicular phase, and the third who took progestin in the luteal phase. And by progestin, they meant MPA 10 milligrams a day. Of course, they all also received gonadotropins for their stimulation and recruitment. Lab procedures were as per standard practice. For some patients, they had to do a blastocyst biopsy for PGS. And subsequently, when they did an analysis, they found much better fertilization rates with follicular phase and luteal phase stimulations with the use of MPA as compared to the antagonist. So this was a very important finding here, that fertilization rates were better, which means you got more and better oocytes with the use of MPA as compared to conventional antagonist in dual stimulation protocols. Also, gonadotropin doses were higher than the conventional protocol, which is expected because progesterone, like estrogen, will have a negative feedback. It will cut off endogenous FSH-LH. You need more regulated cycle, and therefore your consumption of gonadotropins would increase, and that is only expected. So progesterone does not affect the euploid blastocyst rate, as they saw, because they did PGS also in this paper. Also, it gives you better oocyte competence. So not only are they saying that MPA is equal in preventing the premature LH surge, they are actually going a step further and saying it is better and gives you better oocytes with more fertilization rates. At the same time, they do not affect chromosomal rearrangements in the embryos as proven by the PGS which was done. The second study is to further enhance this point, that in a oocyte donation cycle, when you use progesterone instead of the antagonist, the best way to know whether it affects eggs or embryos is to see the pregnancy rates in the recipients. And that is exactly what they did in this second study, which is a parallel kind of study. And you can see here that, of course, again, what is known is the same, that progesterones have been used in normal patients, PCOS, high responders, endometriosis, and poor responders. 5 milligrams is not enough, so 10 milligrams is required. And pregnancy outcomes in one paper have been shown to be lower in a oocyte donation program, and that is why they did this study, to show whether this really affects embryos or it just affects the endometrium and nothing to do with the oocytes and embryos. So you can see here, again, 318 donors, which were randomized into 2 groups, and the cycle outcome of the recipients of these 2 groups. So one, of course, is the standard antagonist cycle, and one is the MPA cycle, and then embryo transfers were done. Number of oocytes retrieved, no difference. Total dose of FSH, etc., everything was comparable. The MPA group had a slightly lower incidence, that means much stronger suppression of the LH surge than the antagonist, but it's not a too big a difference, 1.8 and 0.9%. And early luteinization was not observed in both the groups. What is important here is that even with MPA, you have the same pregnancy rates, ongoing pregnancy rates, early pregnancy losses, everything is the same in the recipients of these two batches of eggs. So it clearly shows that progesterone administration in the follicular phase to prevent a premature LH surge does not affect embryo quality, implantation rates, in fact, might give you more oocytes, which are more competent and therefore higher fertilization rates. So this is what I summarized from these two papers, which I just showed you. So again, just the same thing, that everything else is comparable, and you don't have M2 eggs, you don't get bad reproductive outcomes as compared to the antagonist, as that one initial paper had reported before this study. I did a little more research of my own to see whether you can use progesterones in poor responders also. And again, you can see this study which has been published last year. You can clearly see that progesterone primed ovarian stimulation has excellent control of the premature LH surge. Significantly difference you can see in the progesterone primed group. Of course, you cannot do fresh. So all were frozen transfers. In the antagonist group, all were fresh transfers. Premature LH surge, you can see with antagonist. Number of oocytes similar, number of embryos similar, live birth rate a bit higher here, but statistically not significant. So definitely there is no harm in using MPAs in poor responders. What about the other extreme of the spectrum? What about PCOs and potential high responders? And here I found a paper from way back 2016. I don't know how we missed it at that time. And you can see HMG with medroxyprogesterone acetate versus conventional antagonist. Absolutely comparable on all counts, clinical pregnancies, implantation rates, and what have you. In fact, you have a higher ongoing pregnancy rate per transfer with the MPA group. So this study actually showed that ovarian hyperstimulation reduced when you gave MPA instead of the antagonist in PCOS. Fertilization rate and ongoing pregnancy rate was higher with MPA even in PCOS, and higher consumption of gonadotropin, of course, again, as I repeat, is expected when you use progesterone instead of the antagonist. Another very important, and I had the good fortune of presenting this actually at ISAR, where with Dr. Fadi Sharara, we had a symposium exactly on a similar topic. And this is a paper which has been given. High responder women, mean most of your PCOS patients, may in fact benefit from stimulation with highly purified HMG. Now this war and this debate has been going on for 30 years. Which is superior? Urinary is better, recombinant is better, FSH is better, HMG is better, REC-LH is better. So right now we need some concrete studies, and one of the best studies have been now concluded with the MEGASET trial, actually comparing the use of REC-FSH and HP-HMG in PCOs. We have been taught all these years that PCO don't give LH, use pure FSH, use REC-FSH. Now we have a complete turnaround, that is HMG not the same, but is it better even for the PCOS group? So what do we already know? That of course PCOS are very difficult patients. The ovaries explode, you get hyperstimulation, you can't use agonist. You have to use a three musketeer approach of the antagonist cycle, agonist trigger and freeze-all, all that we know. What we also kind of knew, that HP-HMG will give you fewer eggs rates and fewer interventions for hyperstimulation. So this needed to be established based on the initial studies. Also, we know that the incidence of rise in progesterone on the day of HCG is higher with REC-FSH as compared to HP-HMG, and we know this affects pregnancy rates in fresh transfers. And what we don't know at all is, does REC-FSH or HP-HMG affect embryo competence, which we will only know in the terms of final take-home baby rates with fresh transfer, frozen transfer, and your early pregnancy loss rate and aneuploidy rate. So do we have data on that? And this, I think, is a paper which is a small segment of the MEGASET study done by one of the centers, probably they have published it. And you can see here comparing 150 of REC-FSH in one arm versus HP-HMG 150 IU in the second arm, both with the antagonist. So to show it more clearly, you can see here either REC-FSH or HG were randomized for the two groups, 150 IU per day, adjustments if required on day 6. Trigger was usually with HCG 250 microgram. Unless hyperstimulation was suspected, then agonist trigger and freeze-all was. Luteal phase support was with 100 milligrams BID vaginal progesterone, and single fresh embryo transfer was done at the blastocyst stage. So agonist trigger If they had more than 30, which I think is a bit too much, I wouldn't usually give HCG beyond 15 follicles, which is the current practice, so that we have zero OHSS. Of course, the endpoint of this study was ongoing pregnancy rate, that is at least one intrauterine pregnancy with a fetal heartbeat at 8 weeks. I told you earlier, agonist trigger was given if there were too many follicles. Ongoing pregnancy rate higher with HPHMG. Number of oocytes lower with HPHMG in accordance with previous studies. Hyperstimulation significantly reduced from 21 to less than 10%. So these were the main advantages with the use of HPHMG. But what about live birth and clinical pregnancy rates? So again, of course, most of these patients had very high AMH levels, and the study showed that HPHMG gave you a 19% higher ongoing pregnancy rate than the use of REC-FSH. And of course, HPHMG is different from REC-FSH because it contains HCG-driven LH activity and not just standard native LH, and this might be making all the difference to these pregnancy outcomes. So ongoing pregnancy rates, the study showed after fresh blastocyst transfer were higher with HPHMG. And to still add on a few is what do we know about the final MEGASET trial, and this has been published in Fertility Sterility about a month ago. And again, it proves the point that in fresh embryo transfers, HPHMG gives you better pregnancy rates than REC-FSH in PCO and high responders. Also, if you look at the frozen embryo transfer cycles, again, you can see much higher pregnancy rates with HPHMG as compared to REC-FSH. Pregnancy losses significantly lower with HPHMG as compared to REC-FSH. And of course, as I told you earlier, hyperstimulation, early, late, everything is much lower with HPHMG as compared to REC-FSH. So this is another very important breakthrough we have for this year, that whether it's the end of the road for FSH alone when we are talking of high responders. A few other studies which were given to me, the 2 or 3 other papers, and this was that when you are doing a fresh blastocyst transfer, should you be checking progesterone levels on day 3 after pickup, and does this have any impact? Now, this paper shows that when day 5, the serum progesterone on the day of transfer drops rates. So what they did here was they know, of course, in fresh cycles, there is significant variation in these progesterone levels due to differences in the endogenous progesterone, which comes from the corpora lutea, availability of exogenously administered progesterone via the vaginal or intramuscular route. And we don't have enough data about the effects of this fall in progesterone on pregnancy rates. So they did this study, young females, retrieval of more than 3 oocytes, single or double fresh blastocyst transfer. And what they did was, of course, they gave vaginal progesterone gel just once daily, and they checked progesterone on 5 different occasions. So on the day of retrieval, on ovum pickup plus 3rd day, ovum pickup plus 5th day, and ovum pickup plus 14 days. And of course, they did the blood test 4 to 5 hours after the morning administration of the vaginal gel. And here they found that patients with an ongoing pregnancy had significantly higher progesterone levels on the ovum pickup plus progesterone was seen from day 3 to day 5 in 35% of patients, and these then ended up with a significantly lower ongoing pregnancy rate. So this is a very important finding here. Of course, most of us have now shifted to a lot of freezols, so we don't do too many of these fresh blastocyst transfers. So I don't know the absolute clinical utility of this study finally for all of us, but it's your individual practice. If you're doing fresh transfers, then this is definitely one point which would help you to optimize your pregnancy rates. And the magnitude of the fall is, which is a very significant predictor. So the greater the fall that you have, the less is the chance of pregnancy. Another problem I found with this study was that it used a single dose of vaginal progesterone. Now, if you go and read the monograph of vaginal 8% gel, it clearly says that absorption is closer to the uterus, to the endometrium through the vagina, and may not reflect in serum levels. So I have a bit of a problem with that as to how can you go about interpreting these drops in levels when the actual absorption from vaginal progesterone is not as good as far as serum estimations go, it may be good for pregnancy rates, but if you compare to intramuscular progesterone, you cannot have the same kind of serum levels which you see with injectables. So that's a bit of a drawback of this study, but otherwise it seems okay. So 2 measurements of serum progesterone may help you to find out which patient should not have a fresh transfer. So either you can do a freeze-all for these patients, or maybe they need additional pumping in of some progesterone to rescue DHEA and testosterone and what have you. And we are all familiar with groups 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the Poseidon. The only highlight point here is that group 1 and 2 is unexpected because they had normal reserves to start with but gave you less oocytes. 3 and 4 are expected. Now, of course, management of 1 and 2, we know antagonist with pre-treatment, some form of pre-treatment is a uniform cohort of your 3 or 4 follicles. You're not going to get more than that. Agonist works better for me with the use of HPHMG, which I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years, increasing the dose in some patients, adding LH or using HMG instead of FSH in some patients. What I have started doing since January this year is for pre-treatment, for most poor responders, we like to give the antagonist on day 2, 3, and 4. OC pills, nothing before the cycle. She comes in on day 1 or day 2. You give her the antagonist on day 2, 3, 3 and 4. Cohort. At the same time, I can push the cycle 3 days ahead so as to avoid retrieval or transfer. So that's how beautifully it works. Now, besides what we had, agonists to use HMG, to do embryo pooling, accumulation, PGT, dual stimulation, I spoke about. What about testosterone and DHEA? Of course, it's a well-known fact that with advancing age, there is a drop in testosterone levels in every woman, and this will definitely affect the milieu of the follicle and the oocyte and not give you as many number-wise and quality-wise oocytes that you would expect. We have a huge range of adjuvants all over Amazon and all over the internet, which patients have been taking for the last decade or so. If you actually look at the literature, it's still a highly debatable topic, and we keep having arguments internationally on this. Initially, Glycer showed a lot of benefit. Then we had 3 large RCTs which did not show any benefit with the use of. We don't really have any strong evidence. Same thing is happening with testosterone. Most of the publications were using it for 15 to 20, you can see here with all these studies. But if you look at basic physiology and you look at this conversion from a secondary stage to the antral stage, it is 71 days. So there is absolutely no logic in giving testosterone for 5, 15 or 21 days. What you need to do is the full 71 days. Now, if you have to do that, and of course we had some papers here in 2017 which showed better response with testosterone. Again, 2019, a meta-analysis showing better live birth rates, more eggs, more M2 eggs, more embryos. So there is a lot of controversy in literature. We have been anxiously waiting for the results of the T-Transport trial, which is 2 months of testosterone gel, followed by the long agonist protocol, and with the use of HPHMG. And then, of course, they are going to tell us whether the progesterone made a difference or not, but the results of those trials are not yet out. So this paper came in that testosterone, whether you give it for 20 days or give it for 60 days, does not increase the number of eggs that you get. Please don't take home the wrong message. This paper only talks of number of eggs that you get. So you can see here, of course, all this, what I already told you, is known. But follicular testosterone preparation in poor ovarian reserve remains a controversial intervention. So they did 3 groups: long testosterone, where they gave 12.5 milligrams a day for 2 months; short testosterone, they luteal phase for about 15-20 days; and a control group without testosterone, and all were, of course, poor ovarian reserve patients according to the Bologna criteria. Again, you can see here that they have not differentiated Poseidon 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm not very sure whether they have included all the patients. Also, the number of patients are very small, 17, 17 and 14 in all the 3 arms. And of course, they wanted to see what was the serum testosterone levels, AFC, whether it changed, number of follicles, number of eggs, and so on. And they found that the number of metaphase 2s retrieved in long, short, and control was the same. So they concluded that there is no benefit of giving testosterone. But again, like I told you, the numbers are very small. They haven't categorized which Poseidon groups they have used this for. If they were really bad cases, 42, 43-year-old women with very low AMHs of 0.3, 0.5, you don't expect anything to work anyway. So we need more clarity once this paper is published. Maybe it should be. The only paper which for me is non-practical because I don't do natural cycle IVF, but it has been given to me to share with all of you, and that is whether you should flush a follicle to get the oocyte. I won't say more oocytes because it's a monofollicular natural cycle. So will you get that oocyte for sure if you do? Of course, there are very few studies in this, just 2 studies before the study was done, and prospective RCT was missing. And that is why this group decided to divide the patients, 81 patients where they did aspiration by the standard technique, 83 patients where they did aspiration followed by 5 the follicle 5 times until they made sure they got the oocyte. And of course, they showed that the collected mature oocyte rate was definitely higher in the flushing group. Fertilization rate, now I don't know how to explain fertilization rate being higher. I can understand a greater recovery of oocytes. So if you get 5 out of 10 in 5 out of 10 patients without, get 9 out of 10 with flushing, I understand, but for fertilization rates, I don't understand how they have reported it as higher. Transfer rate, of course, will be higher because you got eggs in more number of patients and so on. So this is what this paper says, that if you have a single follicle, follicular flushing will increase your experience, like Naren or Jaideep, who've been doing it for 25 years, thousands Rupin, and ladies and gentlemen, for all of you being present here in such huge numbers on a lovely Sunday morning, thank you so much.